They say the desert has no mercy. Under the fiery sun and endless skies, shadows stretch thin, and dreams can turn to dust. In this land, people are quick to draw their guns, and just as quick to seal their fates. But in the little town of Dry Gulch, one cowboy made a choice that would change everything. He proposed to a woman without a single spark of love in his heart, only a desperate need to save her dying brother. No one guessed her answer would rattle the entire county. If you think the frontier is harsh, wait until you hear her reply. Dry Gulch wasn't much to look at. With a single row of squat buildings, sand blasted by desert winds lining a lonely stretch of dirt road, it seemed more like a temporary stopover than anyone's final destination. But folks in the Arizona Territory knew that sometimes you just ended up somewhere. Sometimes it was the land itself that chose you. At the far edge of town stood the old Carter boarding house run by Miss Harriet Carter. Everyone called her Aunt Hattie. She had come west with her nephew and niece back when her health was stronger. Now her bones were stiff with age, and her voice croaked with a dryness that matched the desert. She ran the place with the help of her niece, Lucy Carter, and Lucy's younger brother, Jeremiah. Jeremiah Carter was only 15 too young to shoulder a man's burdens. Yet he carried one heavier than most, a persistent fever that doctors from as far as Tucson had tried to treat. To no avail. Some days Jeremiah could barely rise from bed. Lucy tended to him day and night, kneeling beside his bed, brow furrowed with worry. She prayed constantly for a miracle, for a cure, for a slight decrease in the hospital fees piling up. Word was that Jeremiah needed specialized treatment in a bigger city, perhaps in El Paso, or even as far as St. Louis, but that required money. Lots of it. And in a dead-end town like Dry Gulch, money wasn't just lying around. Lucy worked long hours helping Aunt Hattie with the boarders, traveling cowpunchers, silver prospectors, and the occasional family passing through. Still, they barely made enough to pay for Jeremiah's medication. Lucy Carter was known for her gentle heart, a trait that shone in her delicate features. She was slender from missing too many meals, preferring to give her share to Jeremiah. Her eyes held a perpetual worry. Folks who passed through the boarding house often felt a pang of sympathy for her. No one knew how she kept on smiling, but she did. With each day, Lucy's convictions remained unbroken. She would do anything to save her younger brother. Across town, near the dusty corral next to Doyle's saloon, was a different kind of figure entirely. Garrett Dawson, a man who'd ridden trails from Montana to New Mexico. Some called him the wandering cowboy, a drifter who never seemed to settle in one place too long. He had a reputation for a quick draw, a cool head in a gunfight, and an uncanny ability to disappear the moment trouble started. He also had something else, a streak of compassion that betrayed his hardened exterior. Garrett stabled his horse at Thompson's livery and slept on a cot in the back of Doyle's saloon, working as a sometimes bouncer, sometimes ranch hand, always a bit of a mystery. Over time, the folks in Dry Gulch grew used to seeing him sipping coffee at the bar or reading old newspapers by the lamplight. He was polite, but distant, quick to help if needed, but never sharing more than a few words about himself. Rumor had it that once upon a time, Garrett had been part of an outfit from back east, something about a wealthy family, a scandal and a hasty flight to the frontier. But these were rumors. No one asked directly. People in the West knew that sometimes a man's past was best left alone. It was in these parched streets among sun-baked souls, striving for survival, that a chain of events would unfold. Events that started with a single desperate question and ended in a twist few could have predicted. And at the heart of it all was Lucy Carter, a woman with a heavy burden, and Garrett Dawson, a drifter who never planned to stay. Morning arrived with a red sky the kind sailors called a warning. But in Dry Gulch, sailors were in short supply, and no one took it as more than an omen of another scorching day. Lucy awoke before dawn to check on Jeremiah. She found him sweating profusely, his hand trembling. "Jeremiah, can you hear me?" Her voice, soft as a desert breeze, trembled with concern. He opened his eyes briefly. "Luce, I'm okay." But he wasn't okay. His eyes were glazed with fever. Lucy dabbed his forehead with a damp cloth. He tried to speak, but his throat croaked instead of producing sound. She read the look in his eyes. He wanted to reassure her. She smiled through tears. Aunt Hattie shuffled into the room, her old slippers scraping against the floor. "Lucy, dear, you've been up all night. Go on, get some rest before the boarders wake." Lucy shook her head. "I can't. I'll get him some fresh broth and tea." Aunt Hattie's eyes, foggy with age, still held a spark of concern. "Dr. Weston said he needs stronger medicine, Lucy. We're running out." Lucy placed a hand on her aunt's thin shoulder. "I'll figure something out. Maybe Mr. Hanson, the telegraph operator, can contact a bigger hospital." She hesitated. "But we need the money." The old woman nodded. "I'll see what I can do. Perhaps we can take a loan from Sam Rivers at the bank. You know Sam won't loan us more, not after last time." They both fell silent. The weight of Jeremiah's condition sank like a stone between them. The cost of advanced treatment was steep, and the Carter family had meager means. Still, Lucy clung to hope. Shortly after sunrise, Lucy ventured downstairs to meet the boarders. She forced a polite smile as she served eggs and bacon. The men traveling to find ranch work or a rumored silver strike ate quickly and left. One or two of them gave Lucy sympathetic glances. Word of Jeremiah's illness had spread. They left small tips, but it was nowhere near enough. Eventually the boarders cleared out, leaving Lucy to wash the dishes. She was halfway done when she heard a knock on the kitchen door. She set a plate down and opened the door to find Garrett Dawson standing there, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the ground. "Morning, Miss Lucy," he said. "Mr. Dawson, what brings you by so early?" He shrugged, a shy motion that didn't fit his rugged persona. "I was passing by, and Aunt Hattie asked me if I'd drop off some extra flour she got from the general store." He lifted a small burlap sack in explanation. Lucy accepted the sack. "Thank you kindly. You didn't have to bring it all this way." Garrett nodded. Didn't want Aunt Hattie straining herself. "Besides, I gotta earn my keep around here somehow." Lucy gave him a soft grin. She'd seen fleeting kindness in Garrett before, the way he helped old Mrs. Delgado when her wheel broke, or how he once chased off a couple of rowdy drunks harassing young Sadie Mills near the saloon. Yet he never stuck around for praise. He always drifted off as though he feared lingering too long. She heard Jeremiah coughing upstairs, and her smile faded. Garrett glanced upward, as if sensing the boy's struggles. "He doing any better?" "Not really," Lucy said, voice tight. "We need medicine, proper medicine, but we can't afford it." She bit her lip, catching herself before she spilled the whole sad story. "He's a tough kid, though." Garrett nodded. "If there's anything I can do..." Lucy looked at him. The sincerity in his eyes cut through her burden just for a moment. But she also knew he was a drifter. He might leave town any day. I appreciate that she managed. But we'll figure it out. A flicker of something pity or maybe guilt crossed Garrett's face. He tipped his hat. I'll leave you to your chores then. And with that, he turned and disappeared into the dusty street as silently as he came. Lucy returned to the dishes. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder what kind of man Garrett Dawson really was. And then she thought of Jeremiah and resumed scrubbing, pushing all else from her mind. In the days that followed, Jeremiah's condition didn't improve and the weight of uncertainty only grew. Lucy prayed harder, worked longer hours, and scanned the horizon for a miracle she wasn't sure existed. Garrett Dawson reclined on a rickety chair behind Doyle's saloon, half in the shade, half in the sun. The thrum of cicadas filled the midday heat, and the smell of stale beer wafted from inside. He'd been in Dry Gulch longer than usual, nearly 4 months. Typically, he never stayed in one town more than a week or two, preferring to keep his distance. Yet something had made him linger. Perhaps it was the stable job old Doyle paid him a small wage to keep peace, and he got a cot to sleep on in the storeroom. Or maybe it was the subtle draw of Lucy Carter. He admired her grit, quiet but unwavering. She faced each day's hardships with a kind smile. He couldn't help but notice how her hands trembled when she was exhausted, or how she wiped her eyes when she thought no one was looking. It tugged at something deep in his chest, something he didn't want to acknowledge. His wandering gaze settled on a poster tacked to a nearby wall. Wanted Matthew 2-Gun Jenkins. Reward, $500. Garrett scoffed. Half the time the wanted men were long gone, or the bounty was a fraction of what the posters promised. He knew bounty hunting was an option, he'd tried it before, but it left a bitter taste in his mouth. He wanted to help Lucy and Jeremiah, sure, but risking his neck for a reward that might not even be real was a gamble. Still, that reward, if it was real, $500 could pay for Jeremiah's medical bills with some left over. Temptation snaked through Garrett's thoughts. He folded his arms across his chest. Why was he letting the Carters' troubles get to him? He'd promised himself he'd never get involved again. Not after the fiasco back east, an incident involving a fortune he'd walked away from, and a fiancée he never truly loved. He had sworn off entanglements, vowing to roam free, and yet Lucy's determined face hovered in his mind like a spectre. He exhaled deeply and rose from the chair. Inside the saloon, a few patrons drank away the afternoon. Doyle, a burly man with a thick moustache, polished glasses behind the bar. "Afternoon, Garrett," he grunted. "Heard any news from the Carter place?" "That poor boy any better?" Garrett shook his head, approaching the bar. "He's not. And Lucy's worried sick, though she'd never say so." Doyle grumbled sympathetically. "Carter family's always been decent folks. Aunt Hattie used to serve the best pies in town when her joints were still good. Let me know if I can help." Garrett appreciated the sentiment. He looked at the rows of bottles behind Doyle, considering a stiff drink to chase away his guilt. But he settled for water. He needed a clear head. He took a long swig, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. Then his gaze caught the reflection of that wanted poster pinned behind the bar as well. Doyle noticed. Thinking of going after Jenkins, the saloon owner asked quietly. "He's a mean one. Robbed a stagecoach near Yuma last month, shot 2 men. Garrett frowned. "The poster says $500. Don't know if it's legit." Doyle shrugged. "Marshall's in charge of it. You'd have to check in with him. But I bet it'd be enough to send Jeremiah to a real doctor." Garrett slammed the glass down, water splashing. I'm not sure. Bounty hunting's a tricky business. Doyle scratched his mustache. Might be the only chance that boy's got. But it's your call. Garrett nodded and strode to the door, each step weighed by indecision. He could earn more working as a ranch hand, but that was slow money. Jeremiah didn't have time to wait. Outside, he ran into Wyatt Caldwell, a rancher from up north. Howdy, Garrett. Heard you might be thinking of bounty hunting. Word travels fast in a small town. Garrett shoved his hands into his pockets. Just a thought, Wyatt. Wyatt smirked. I'm heading out of town soon to deliver cattle, else I'd join you. Watch your back if you go after Jenkins, though. He's got a gang with him. Garrett grunted in thanks and tipped his hat. As he made his way toward the livery, he couldn't shake the turmoil swirling in his mind. If he left Dry Gulch, hunted Jenkins, maybe, just maybe he could return with enough cash to help Jeremiah. But was that enough motivation? He thought of Lucy, and in that moment, he realized he didn't just want to help Jeremiah. He felt an inexplicable desire to protect them both. Yet an irrational fear gnawed at him. Emotions lead to attachments, and attachments lead to heartbreak. Still, the notion of simply riding away without a backward glance made him feel hollow. He reached the livery, where he found his horse, Dusty, munching lazily on some hay. What do you think, boy? Garrett murmured, stroking the mare's flank. Should we risk everything again? The horse offered no reply, just a contented snort. Garrett gave a half smile. Sometimes animals were the best confidants. Finally he saddled up and rode out of town, heading toward a quiet ridge overlooking the desert. He needed space to think away from prying eyes. As he surveyed the endless expanse, memory and longing entwined in his heart. The West had taught him to survive alone, but Lucy Carter had reminded him of his own humanity. He wrestled with that thought, the dust swirling around him. A man had to make a choice, and fate was about to push him faster than he cared to go. 2 days later, Dry Gulch awoke to news that Jeremiah Carter's condition had worsened drastically overnight. Lucy had spent the entire evening by his side, pressing cold compresses to his burning forehead, listening to his labored breathing. By morning, he was delirious. Dr. Weston visited and gave a dire warning. He needs specialized care. I can't do more with the supplies I have here. If you can take him to the hospital in El Paso, they may save him. If not, his voice trailed off. Lucy's world blurred. She had no money, no means of traveling so far. Despair weighed heavy on her shoulders. She retreated to the backyard where she often went to cry in private. There, behind the old shed, she sank to her knees, pressing her fist to her mouth to stifle sobs. A cough alerted her. She wasn't alone. Garrett Dawson stood a few paces away, hat in hand, face etched with concern. Lucy, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to intrude. I was coming by to see if you needed anything. She rose hastily, wiping tears. He's dying, Garrett, she whispered brokenly. I can't save him. Garrett took a step forward, heart pounding. He recalled the bounty hunting plan. But that was uncertain. Jenkins was dangerous, and there was no telling how long it would take, or if Garrett would even survive. Jeremiah might not last that long. He took another step carefully. Lucy was trembling. Without thinking, he reached out and steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. A surge of warmth shot through him, and he swallowed hard. Lucy, he began, his voice tight. There might be another way. She looked up, her tear-streaked face, questioning. Garrett forced the words out. If we got married, I could sign off on a loan at the bank. Sam Rivers might trust me if I had a stake in this town. I got a bit of money saved up. Not much, but together maybe we could get enough for Jeremiah's treatment. Lucy's eyes widened. Married Garrett? Why would you do that? He hesitated. It felt like the logical step in the moment, an almost businesslike arrangement. He didn't want to see Lucy lose Jeremiah. But was it love? His chest tightened at the thought. Love was dangerous, unpredictable. He'd convinced himself he had none to give. So he clarified carefully. This wouldn't be for love. It would be to help Jeremiah. Once he's better, if you want to. You could annul it, or we'd figure something out. Lucy stared at him as if he'd just spoken in tongues. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Finally, she shook her head, backing away. Garrett, I can't ask that of you. You're not asking. I'm offering, he replied softly. Look, if it helps save Jeremiah, it'd be worth it. Silence stretched between them, thick with motes and unspoken feelings. Lucy's mind spun. This was preposterous marriage without love. But the thought of Jeremiah's life hanging in the balance overshadowed everything. Garrett? I don't know, she whispered. This is too sudden. He exhaled. I know. Take some time to think on it. I'll be at Doyle's. She watched him walk away, her heart pounding in her ears. She knew how gossip traveled in a small town. People would talk, but did that matter more than Jeremiah's life? All day, Lucy tended to Jeremiah, fed him spoonfuls of broth, measured his ragged breaths. Her thoughts churned with Garrett's proposal. By afternoon, she was so exhausted she could hardly stand. Aunt Hattie found her curled beside Jeremiah's bed in tears. Lucy, dear, what's the matter? She looked up at her aunt's weathered face. Garrett Dawson offered. He offered to marry me so we could get a loan to help Jeremiah. Aunt Hattie's eyes widened. Then she leaned heavily on her cane. That's quite an offer. He said it's not for love, just a way to help. Aunt Hattie pursed her lips. Do you trust him? Lucy's mind raced. Did she? She knew Garrett was kind, and though distant, he'd never lied to her. I think so. Her aunt's gaze softened. Sometimes in life, child, we gotta do what's necessary. It's not my place to judge. But ask yourself if you can handle the consequences. Lucy nodded, eyes searching Jeremiah's pale face. He was everything to her. She thought back to all the times she held him when he was a baby, all the nights she'd read him stories. He needed help now more than ever, and Garrett was offering a lifeline. She took a trembling breath. All right, she whispered to herself. All right then. That evening, Lucy walked to Doyle's saloon, ignoring the curious stares of ranch hands and passing drifters. She found Garrett at a corner table, hat pulled low, nursing a mug of coffee. He glanced up, heart thudding. Before he could speak, Lucy lowered her eyes and said, I'll do it. His breath caught. You sure? She nodded, the weight of her decision evident. If it'll save Jeremiah, I'll marry you. Garrett swallowed, his mind spinning. He'd expected relief, but instead, he felt a strange pang of regret. This was supposed to be a solution to a problem, not the forging of something real. Then let's talk to the preacher tomorrow, he said quietly. We'll set it up quick. Lucy simply nodded, feeling as if she'd just signed her life away. A swirl of guilt, hope, and fear knotted in her stomach. Neither of them could foresee how that simple agreement would unleash a storm bigger than any they'd ever faced. The next day found Lucy Carter in a borrowed white dress, standing in the tiny wooden church at the edge of Dry Gulch. The church stood amid a scattering of cacti, its roof angled precariously, and its paint peeling from the relentless sun. Still, it was the only church in town, and Reverend James was the only preacher. Garrett Dawson stood beside her, wearing his cleanest shirt and a determined expression. Aunt Hattie hovered nearby in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes, though Lucy couldn't tell if the tears were from joy, sadness, or sheer relief that Jeremiah might be saved. Only a handful of townspeople attended, mostly out of curiosity. Wyatt Caldwell doffed his hat in support. Doyle and a few saloon patrons came too, wanting to witness the union of a man known for drifting and a woman who seemed too good for this harsh land. The wedding was over in less than 10 minutes. Simple vows exchanged rings, cheap iron bands courtesy of the local smith, and a final pronouncement that Lucy Carter and Garrett Dawson were husband and wife. Garrett barely met Lucy's eyes during the ceremony. When it came time for the kiss, he pressed a chaste peck to her cheek, tension rolling off him in waves. Lucy held her hands clutched together, feeling each beat of her heart hammering. She couldn't believe she was now Mrs. Dawson, that Jeremiah's life hinged on this moment. Afterwards, as they stood on the church steps, the midday sun glaring overhead, Sam Rivers, the local banker, approached them. His expression was reserved, but he offered a handshake. "Garrett. Lucy, congratulations. Heard the news this morning." Garrett cleared his throat. "Afternoon, Sam. Now that you're hitched, perhaps we can talk about that loan. I'd like to see how we can help." Lucy felt a surge of relief. Her face brightened at the thought that the bank might now see them as a stable, united front. Garrett nodded. "Tomorrow, Sam. We'll come by your office." Wordlessly, Lucy's gaze drifted to the scattered onlookers. She caught hushed whispers, half smiles. A swirl of gossip was already forming. She did her best to ignore it. Aunt Hattie stepped forward, took Lucy's hand. "I'll walk back with you, dear. We'll see how Jeremiah is faring." Garrett watched them go, a strange hollowness in his chest. He was a husband now, at least on paper. Should he accompany Lucy home? Should he remain distant? The lines of this arrangement were so blurred. Before he could decide, Wyatt Caldwell clapped him on the shoulder. "Looks like you're a family man now, friend." Garrett exhaled. "Something like that." Wyatt laughed without mirth. "You don't look too sure." Garrett forced a tight grin. "We all do what we must." For the rest of the day, Lucy tended to Jeremiah, updating him on the marriage. The boy blinked at her in confusion, drifting in and out of feverish haze. She half expected him to protest, but he was too weak to offer more than a raspy "thank you." That night, after Lucy tucked Jeremiah in, she found Garrett standing in the parlor, staring at a patch of peeling wallpaper. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain how to act around her new husband. "Would you like some tea?" she asked softly. He turned, managing a small smile. "Sure." They ended up sitting across from each other at the small kitchen table, sipping tea in awkward silence. Finally, Lucy set her cup down. "Thank you, Garrett, for doing this. I can't repay you." He shifted, uncomfortable. "You don't owe me anything. This is just to help Jeremiah." She nodded, ignoring the disappointment that nudged at her heart. Of course it was just for Jeremiah. That was the whole reason. After a moment, she mustered the courage to say, We'll go see Sam Rivers in the morning. Then we can arrange for the trip to El Paso. Garrett nodded eyes on his tea. Yes, the sooner the better. They sat in strained quiet once more. Lucy felt tears threatening to fall, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them spill in front of Garrett. She wouldn't burden him further with her emotions. Eventually she stood wiping invisible crumbs from her apron. I'll make up the spare room for you, Garrett. I figure we won't. You know it'd be proper for you to have your own space. Her face burned with a mixture of shame and confusion. He cleared his throat, nodding. Yes, that's probably best. She led him upstairs past Jeremiah's room, to a small room with a single bed and a creaky floor. The entire walk tension hung thick in the air. This wasn't a typical wedding night, but then again, nothing about their union was typical. Once Garrett was settled, Lucy returned to her own room feeling both relief and an odd hollowness. She paced the floor, thinking of Jeremiah, thinking of Garrett, replaying the words husband and wife in her mind until exhaustion claimed her. Meanwhile, Garrett lay atop the spare bed, staring at the ceiling. Despite telling himself this was purely a matter of necessity, he couldn't deny the knot in his stomach. He hadn't been this close to a real home or a real family since he'd left back east. An image of Lucy's tearful eyes flashed across his mind, stirring something he tried to bury long ago. The next morning, in the full glare of the sun, they would face the town together as newlyweds, but each lay in separate rooms, haunted by doubts and longing they refused to name. Morning dawned with a burning orange sunrise, painting the dusty rooftops in streaks of gold. Lucy was up early to care for Jeremiah, giving him water and a dose of the last of his medicine. His fever had receded slightly enough for him to offer a weak smile. "You and Garrett, you're married now," he said, voice cracking. "Is he good to you?" "Lucy." She brushed back his damp hair. "He's helping us, Jeremiah. That's all that matters." But deep down, Lucy wondered if that would always be enough. She and Garrett then headed to the Dry Gulch Bank, a modest establishment with squeaky floorboards and a single teller's booth. Sam Rivers waited in a cramped office at the back, perched behind a weathered wooden desk cluttered with ledgers. "Morning," the banker said, removing his spectacles. "Congratulations on tying the knot. Let's see what we can do for you folks." Lucy and Garrett sat in the two chairs opposite the desk. Lucy's stomach felt like a knotted rope, her anxiety climbing. Garrett fidgeted, his eyes darting across the dingy wallpaper. "So," Sam began, "you're looking for a loan to cover medical expenses for Jeremiah?" Lucy nodded. "Yes, enough to cover transport, hospital fees, anything that can save my brother. We'll pay back every cent." Sam leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I know your situation. Lucy and I trust your character. And Garrett, I've seen you around town, heard good things from old Doyle." He paused, glancing between them. "But I need some assurance that you can repay the loan. We're talking a considerable sum." Garrett cleared his throat, pulling a small pouch from his pocket. "I've saved some. Not nearly enough, but it's a start." He poured a few coins and a crumpled banknote onto the desk. "About $100 total." Sam studied the meager pile. $100 down. "And how much do you need in total?" Lucy inhaled shakily. "Dr. Weston said it could run up to $400 or more for the specialized treatment in El Paso. Travel expenses too. So, we need $300 more, at least." The banker's face tightened. "That's a hefty amount. But let me see what I can do." He flipped through ledgers and asked a few more questions, scribbling notes. Finally, he looked up, his expression guarded. "I can extend a loan of $300 on 2 conditions. 1, you both sign a promissory note making you equally responsible for repayment. 2, you offer some form of collateral." Lucy swallowed hard. "We don't have much. The boarding house belongs to Aunt Hattie, and it's in disrepair." Garrett rubbed his chin. "How about my horse? Dusty's not exactly top stock, but—" Sam waved a hand. "A horse won't quite cut it, given we're fronting $300. However, I might accept partial collateral on the boarding house, if Aunt Hattie consents." Lucy's heart sank. This put Aunt Hattie's livelihood on the line. But what choice did they have? "All right," she said hesitantly. "I'll talk to Aunt Hattie. If she agrees, we'll sign." Sam nodded. "Fair enough. If everything's in order, I'll have the paperwork ready tomorrow." They left the bank in a haze of hope and anxiety. Lucy tried to steady her breathing. This was their chance, but it felt precarious. Garrett walked beside her, hands in his pockets. "We'll figure it out," he said, sensing her worry. She mustered a tiny smile. "Thank you." But as they crossed the dusty street, a clatter of hooves thundered from the end of town. A group of riders, a handful of men, dusty bandanas tied around their necks, tore into Dry Gulch. They skidded to a halt outside Doyle's saloon, dismounting in a swirl of dust. Garrett grabbed Lucy's arm, pulling her toward cover near the blacksmith's shop. He recognized one of the riders instantly, Matthew Two-Gun Jenkins, the man from the wanted poster. Lucy's eyes widened. "Is that Garrett?" Nodded grimly, heart pounding. "It is. Jenkins is as bad as they say." Jenkins. A lean man with a hawk-like glare sauntered into the saloon with his posse. The sense of danger rippled across the street like a shockwave. People hurried indoors, shutting windows and doors. Lucy clutched Garrett's sleeve. "We should get back to Jeremiah. No telling what they'll do." Garrett's jaw tightened. He recalled the $500 bounty. A chunk of that, combined with the loan, could cover everything and more. But he also knew Jenkins was cunning, and he had a gang of cutthroats at his back. Still, the seeds of temptation sprouted again. $500 was no small sum, especially with Jeremiah's life on the line. Lucy sensed his tension. "Garrett, don't go doing anything reckless." He set his jaw, forcing a reassuring look. "I won't. Let's get you home." Together they hurried back, each step weighed with a new sense of unease. That afternoon, Lucy managed to get Aunt Hattie's reluctant approval for using part of the boarding house as collateral, and they prepared to finalize the loan. Jeremiah's transfer to El Paso seemed within reach. But that night word spread fast. Jenkins and his gang had no intention of leaving town just yet. They drank themselves silly at the saloon, picking fights with locals, bragging about a job that had netted them a stash of stolen goods. Tension coiled through Dry Gulch. Alone in his makeshift bedroom, Garrett stared out the window into the dark street, the moon casting eerie shadows. He thought of Jenkins, the bounty, and Lucy's desperate plea. If he could single-handedly bring Jenkins in, or at least get him to the marshal, he'd solve all their financial troubles without risking Aunt Hattie's boarding house. But that required a cunning plan, more than a little nerve, and a willingness to kill if it came down to it. Garrett sighed, turning away from the window. He wondered if Lucy would ever forgive him if he went behind her back. Yet the West was a place where fortunes were won or lost on a single shot. Garrett found himself unable to sleep, haunted by the image of Jeremiah, coughing pale as death. Come morning, it would be time to decide rely on the risky bank loan or take a chance at an even riskier bounty that might save Jeremiah without plunging Lucy further into debt. Neither path was safe, but in this frontier, safety was a luxury no one could afford. Morning arrived with a tense hush. The sky was cloudless, promising a scorching day. Garrett rose early, slipping out of the house before Lucy woke. He wanted to check on the saloon, see if Jenkins and his men were still around. Sure enough, he found them sprawled across tables, snoring drunkenly. Doyle was nowhere in sight, probably holed up in his room, too frightened to confront them. Empty bottles littered the floor. Garrett observed them from the doorway, hands resting near his belt holster. A reckless idea formed. If he could capture Jenkins while the outlaw was still in a drunken stupor, perhaps he could cart him off to the nearest marshal's office. But the gang members, 6 men including Jenkins, wouldn't be easy to subdue. "Don't even think about it," came a low voice from behind. Garrett spun to find Wyatt Caldwell, rifle in hand, standing near the bar. Garrett exhaled, stepping into the saloon carefully. "Wyatt? Didn't know you were here." Wyatt's gaze flicked to the sleeping gang. "I stayed the night, keeping an eye out. Jenkins is a cunning snake." Garrett nodded. "I need that bounty, Wyatt." Wyatt's lips pursed. "I heard about the loan for Lucy's brother. Don't get me wrong, I want that boy to live too. But taking on Jenkins and his men alone is suicide." Garrett's eyes scanned the outlaws, noticing their guns lying on the tables. "Maybe if we get the drop on them." Wyatt grimaced. "You're talking about a bloodbath. This is a small town, Dawson. Innocent folks could get caught in the crossfire." Garrett hesitated. He wasn't a killer at heart, but Jenkins wouldn't go quietly. Another approach might be to tip off a nearby marshal, but that could take days, and Jenkins might slip away at any moment. Wyatt seemed to read his thoughts. "I'm riding out this afternoon to deliver cattle. I could pass word to the law in Sierra Rock, but it'd be at least 2 days before they get here. Time Jeremiah didn't have." Garrett raked a hand through his hair. Damn it. He paced, torn between urgent desperation and the risk. Wyatt set a hand on his shoulder. "Look, friend, I know you're trying to help Lucy, but there's no shame in waiting for the law." Garrett met his eyes. "Jeremiah's dying, Wyatt. Every hour counts." They both stared at the ragged gang, oblivious to the moral quandary playing out across the saloon. Finally, Wyatt sighed. "We'd need a plan. Something that doesn't end with half the town shot up." Garrett nodded slowly. "I'm open to suggestions." They huddled in a corner, whispering ideas. Perhaps a distraction luring Jenkins away from his men. Or a nighttime ambush once the outlaws were separated. Each plan bristled with danger. Eventually, Garrett shook his head. "I can't do this without Lucy's knowledge." Wyatt's face softened. "She might not support it." Garrett grimaced. "She might not, but I owe her honesty." By late morning, Garrett returned to the boarding house. Lucy was up tending to Jeremiah. She looked harried, but relieved to see him. "Where were you?" He drew her aside, glancing at Aunt Hattie, who was fussing over a pot of stew. Lowering his voice, he explained Jenkins' presence in town, the bounty, and his plan. Lucy's eyes widened with alarm. "Garrett, no, it's too dangerous." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "If I pull it off, we'll have enough to pay for Jeremiah's care without mortgaging Aunt Hattie's home. I can't sit around while your family loses everything." Tears welled in Lucy's eyes. "I don't want you killed, Garrett, and Jeremiah needs you too." His heart twisted. She was worried about him. I'm not a hero, Lucy, but I can handle myself. I've faced worse. If I can find a way to turn Jenkins in without a full-on shootout, I'll do it. She wiped her eyes, trembling. I can't stop you, can I? He shook his head sadly. I'm sorry. She pressed a hand to her lips, then spoke in a wavering voice. All right, if this is truly our best shot, be careful. Garrett pulled her into a quick, awkward embrace, feeling her shoulders quake against him. He inhaled the faint scent of her hair, heart pounding. This was far from a normal marriage, but the closeness felt undeniably real in that moment. He broke away reluctant. I'll meet Wyatt and see what we can manage. You stay here with Jeremiah. Keep the doors locked. Lucy nodded, eyes brimming with a plea. Please, Garrett, come back alive. He dipped his head in a silent promise and left before his resolve could crumble. Late afternoon's golden light slanted across Dry Gulch as Garrett and Wyatt positioned themselves behind crates stacked beside Doyle's saloon. Jenkins and his men had woken from their drunken stupor and stumbled around town, intimidating shopkeepers and scaring off at travelers. Now they were back in the saloon, guzzling whiskey. Ready? Wyatt asked, eyes fixed on the entrance. Garrett exhaled, steeling himself. As I'll ever be. Their plan was risky. Garrett would pose as a courier from a potential buyer for Jenkins's stolen goods. Wyatt had spread a rumor that the Carter boarding house was a good meeting spot, private and quiet. If Jenkins agreed, he'd ride over there with minimal men, leaving the rest in the saloon. Meanwhile, Wyatt would wait with a lasso and a rifle in a hidden vantage point. Garrett would try to coax Jenkins into surrender at gunpoint. It sounded straightforward, but Jenkins was unpredictable. One false move, and bullets would fly. At dusk, Garrett entered the saloon alone, ignoring the stench of stale liquor. Jenkins was at a table with 3 of his men playing cards. The outlaw's eyes narrowed when he saw Garrett approach. "Who are you?" Jenkins barked, tossing his cards face down on the table. Garrett slid into a chair opposite him, feigning confidence. "Name's Dawson. Heard you got some merchandise for sale." Jenkins glanced at his men, then back at Garrett. "Where'd you hear that?" Garrett shrugged. "A mutual acquaintance." He tried to appear nonchalant. "I know someone with deep pockets. They're passing through tomorrow, want to see what you got." Jenkins smirked. "What's in it for you?" Garrett leaned back. "Finder's fee, that's all. 5%. The outlaw studied him, fingers tapping the table. "And where's this meeting supposed to happen?" "Carter. Boarding house. It's empty tonight. Owners are out." A lie, but hopefully Jenkins wouldn't know. "Real private. You bring a sample of your haul. The buyer sees it. You set a deal, everyone leaves happy." Jenkins snorted. "Sounds too good to be true." Garrett's heart hammered, but he forced a grin. "Take it or leave it." Jenkins exchanged a look with his men. "I'll take half my crew. Rest'll stay here to keep watch. If you're playing me, boy, I'll put a bullet between your eyes." Garrett shrugged. "Suit yourself. Meet me there in half an hour." He stood to leave, heart pounding like a drum. Jenkins was taking the bait. Outside, Garrett signaled Wyatt with a subtle nod before mounting Dusty and riding at a brisk pace to the boarding house. On the way, he passed Lucy, who peeked nervously through the front window. She ran to the door, panic etched on her face. "They're coming here," she whispered urgently. "Don't worry. Wyatt's in position. Take Aunt Hattie and Jeremiah into the cellar. Stay down until it's over." Lucy swallowed hard, nodding. "Please, Garrett." He gently touched her cheek. "Trust me." With that, she hurried Aunt Hattie and Jeremiah, who was barely conscious, into the cellar. Garrett hurried to set the trap, removing a few lanterns to keep the interior dim. Then he stood near the front parlor revolver, holstered but ready. Hoofbeats thundered outside. The door banged open, and Jenkins stormed in, 2 men behind him, each brandishing guns. Garrett stepped forward, hands raised slightly to show he wasn't an immediate threat. "Where's the buyer?" Jenkins snarled, glancing around. Garrett shrugged. "Running late. Should be here any minute." Jenkins scowled, suspicion blazing in his eyes. "You sure about that?" Suddenly, from the window behind Jenkins, Wyatt called out, "Drop your weapons!" The click of a rifle hammer echoed in the silence. The outlaws whipped around. Garrett drew his revolver in a flash, aiming at Jenkins. "Don't move," he growled. For a heartbeat, it looked like Jenkins might comply. But then one of his men lunged sideways, firing a wild shot. Glass shattered a bullet, embedding in the wall near Garrett. Wyatt's rifle roared in response, the bullet catching the man's arm. He collapsed with a scream. Jenkins cursed, spinning and firing at the window, forcing Wyatt to duck. The second outlaw dove behind a sofa, returning fire blindly. Garrett ducked behind a chair, adrenaline surging. The small parlor erupted in chaos, gunshots splintering wood, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Garrett risked a glance, saw Jenkins crouched behind a table, eyes murderous. Jenkins sneered. "So this was a trap, you son of a—" He fired another shot, grazing Garrett's shoulder. Pain flared hot, but Garrett grit his teeth, returning fire. Wyatt leaned in from the window, firing again, hitting the second outlaw in the leg. The man howled, dropping his gun. Jenkins realized he was outnumbered, but he had no intention of surrendering. Garrett lunged to the side, aiming carefully. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck Jenkins's gun hand, sending his revolver clattering to the floor. Jenkins clutched his wounded hand with a feral roar. Garrett trained his barrel on the outlaw's chest, breathing ragged. "Don't move." Jenkins glared, blood seeping through his fingers. "You're dead, Dawson. You hear me? Dead." Wyatt burst in, rifle raised, sweat beading on his brow. "Shut up, Jenkins." They disarmed Jenkins fully and tied his hands with rope. The wounded outlaws lay groaning on the floor, clutching their injuries. Wyatt set about binding them as well, ignoring their curses. Garrett exhaled, checking his own wound. It was just a graze, but enough to throb like fat. He signaled to Lucy, who cautiously peeked out from the cellar steps. Relief flooded her face at the sight of Garrett still standing. She rushed to his side, eyes brimming with tears. "You're hurt." He managed a tight grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just a scratch." Wyatt turned to them. "We need to get Jenkins and his men to the marshal in Sierra Rock. I'll help you do it." Garrett nodded, staggering slightly from the shock. Lucy grabbed his arm to steady him. Jenkins continued to spit venomous threats. But Garrett knew the worst was over, so long as they got him out of Dry Gulch before the rest of his gang found out. Lucy's gaze flicked to the battered furniture, the broken glass, the bullet holes. But the damage was worth it if it meant claiming that $500 bounty money that could save Jeremiah. Garrett reached out to brush Lucy's arm, voice trembling with adrenaline. "It's done." She squeezed his hand, tears of relief mixing with her fear. "Thank God." None of them realized that another man from Jenkins's crew had been watching from a distance, racing off to alert the rest of the gang. A new storm was gathering on the horizon, threatening to undo everything they'd fought for. As the early sun rose over Sierra Rock, Garrett and Lucy stepped out of the jailhouse, the dust swirling around their boots like the weight that had lifted from their shoulders. They walked slowly, silently, each lost in their thoughts, hands still entwined. Garrett's mind reeled. Lucy had just confessed her love without condition, without expectation. He had faced gunfire, betrayal, and moral battles, but nothing had shaken him quite like hearing her say she loved him. He stopped in the middle of the street and gently pulled her closer. "Lucy," he said, voice low. "I meant what I said in there. I wasn't ready when I first asked you to marry me. I was scared. I thought love made men weak. But you've proven it's what makes us strong." Lucy met his gaze, her eyes still moist with tears. "Then don't run, Garrett. Not from me, not from us." "I'm not running anymore," he whispered. "I want to stay. For real this time." The clink of boots on wood interrupted them. Wyatt Caldwell stood on the jailhouse porch, watching with a knowing smirk. "Well," he said, tipping his hat, "seems the outlaw's not the only one who got captured today." Garrett chuckled. "Yeah, reckon I never stood a chance." Wyatt walked over, clapped Garrett on the back. "I'll see to it that Jenkins and his men stay locked up until the court processes the full bounty. You two go get your boy to the hospital." Lucy looked from Wyatt to Garrett. "We should leave today. Every hour counts." With the marshal's approval, they arranged for the partial bounty, $200 up front, and secured a wagon from a local rancher. Garrett helped load Jeremiah carefully, making sure the boy was propped up with soft blankets and cool compresses. As they prepared to depart the town, Doctor handed Lucy a sealed packet. "Give this to the hospital staff in El Paso. It contains Jeremiah's notes, what little we could gather here." She accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." They set off down the rocky trail, Wyatt riding alongside until the outskirts of Sierra Rock. As they paused by an old mesquite tree, Wyatt gave Garrett a long look. "You did good, Dawson. Don't forget there's more than one way to be a hero. Keep her safe." "I intend to," Garrett said, and with that, Wyatt turned his horse and rode back. The desert stretched before them, golden sands, towering cliffs, and a heat that shimmered like glass. Garrett drove the wagon steadily, while Lucy tended to Jeremiah. Her brother drifted in and out of sleep, mumbling incoherent words, his forehead beaded with sweat. At one point, Garrett caught Lucy staring at her brother, her expression a mixture of hope and guilt. "You okay?" he asked. She blinked, startled. "Just thinking. I married you to save him, but now I can't imagine my life without you." He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "You saved both of us, Lucy. More than you know." They camped under the stars that night, a small fire crackling beside the wagon. Lucy rested her head on Garrett's shoulder as they watched the flames dance. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if Jeremiah hadn't gotten sick?" she asked quietly. Garrett considered that. "I might have ridden out of Dry Gulch and never looked back, and I might still be serving coffee to cowhands and praying for a miracle." He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But fate had other plans. The next day, they arrived at the El Paso hospital. Nurses rushed to take Jeremiah inside, their faces serious, but not without compassion. Lucy gripped Garrett's hand as they waited. After what felt like hours, a doctor emerged. "We've stabilized him," he said. "He's weak, but with proper care, I believe we can turn this around." Lucy broke down in tears. Garrett held her tightly, whispering reassurances. Over the next week, they took turns by Jeremiah's bedside. Aunt Hattie arrived by stagecoach with what little money she'd managed to save, insisting on staying nearby. Though tired and worn, she smiled, seeing Garrett and Lucy together. "You two look like a real couple now," she said, one morning, watching them finish each other's sentences over breakfast. Garrett grinned. Guess we're starting to act like one, too. On the 7th day, Jeremiah opened his eyes fully. Luce, did we make it? She laughed through her tears. We did, little brother. You're going to be okay. Garrett stepped into the room, hat in hand. Told you we'd get you here. Jeremiah stared at him, his voice faint but full of curiosity. Are you really my brother-in-law? Garrett winked. Looks that way. And for the first time in weeks, Jeremiah smiled a weak, flickering grin, but a smile nonetheless. Outside, the sun blazed down on El Paso, but for Garrett and Lucy, the future was finally starting to look bright. Within days, the territorial court confirmed the bounty, $500. With part of the funds already advanced, Garrett and Lucy wasted no time arranging Jeremiah's transport to the hospital in El Paso. They hired a proper wagon, a skilled driver, and brought Aunt Hattie along for support. Jeremiah was barely conscious, but hope traveled with them. The journey was rough, but the hospital staff wasted no time. After tense days of watching, praying, and pacing hallways, they finally heard the words they'd longed for. Jeremiah's fever had broken. He would live. Lucy collapsed in tears of gratitude. Garrett, standing behind her, whispered a prayer of thanks. The hospital bill consumed most of the bounty, but Jeremiah's recovery made it worthwhile. As he regained strength, Garrett and Lucy grew closer, the walls between them slowly dissolving. Their once contractual marriage began to feel real. One starlit night outside the hospital, Garrett gently teased, "Remember when you said you wanted an annulment?" Lucy smiled faintly. "I thought you didn't want me." He pulled her close. "I want nothing more. If you'll have me, I want this marriage for real." Her voice was soft. "I do, Garrett." Back in Dry Gulch, they returned to quiet fanfare. Garrett was a local hero, Lucy a figure of strength and grace. Doyle raised a glass in Garrett's honor, and Aunt Hattie resumed work at the boarding house with renewed purpose. Garrett purchased a small plot on the edge of town. Together, he and Lucy began building a modest home. Jeremiah, stronger by the day, dreamed aloud of raising horses. Garrett worked the land, while Lucy supported both the ranch and the boarding house. One spring day, Lucy watched Garrett mending a fence. He glanced up, sweat on his brow, and smiled a smile that said, "I'm home." She walked over, wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "Feeling grateful, Mr. Dawson?" He kissed her cheek. "More than you'll ever know, Mrs. Dawson." In the unforgiving West, love had found them. Born of desperation, tested by danger, their union had grown into something real. And that, above all else, was worth fighting for. In a land of dust and danger, Lucy and Garrett built a home and a legacy upon the unlikeliest beginnings. What started as a desperate proposal to save a dying boy turned into a bond forged by sacrifice and sealed in love. Their story reminds us that even in the harshest of frontiers, compassion can blossom into something extraordinary. Thank you for joining us on this epic Wild West journey. If you found yourself cheering for Lucy, rooting for Jeremiah, and holding your breath as Garrett faced impossible odds, we invite you to share that excitement. Please hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic tales that stir the heart and feed the soul. Share this story with friends who love a good frontier romance. Together, let's keep these tales of courage and love alive in every dusty corner of the internet. Yeehaw!